Yes. Shalom, Chaverim. Shalom. I'll go into more detail on this a little bit later. But there's a lot of people, what you see right there is Ibrit. Right? What is Ibrit? Ibrit, right? Or somebody say Abrit, but actually pointing correctly. Ibrit is what we say for Hebrew. You know, there's this rumor that's been going on for a long time, right? That Hebrew, right? Hebrew is a lineage. That's not correct. There's a misunderstanding of Hebrew, right? A misunderstanding of Hebrew in the scripture. So let's do this right here. Now we have Eber. People say, oh, Hebrew is from Eber, right? Now the language is called Ibrit. There's Ibrit, and then there's a dialect that we have in the Hebrew scripture, or the Tanakh, known as Yehudit was called the Jews' language. But this is all about that Hebrew doesn't come from Eber, in a sense. In other words, the Hebrews, to say like Avram is called Ha-Ibri, not because he's a descendant of Eber. I don't know, people get this idea, real confusion about the Shem, Ham, and Yafet. You know, remember they had said that Ham was cursed, but then we read the Bible and it says Canaan was cursed, but they kept saying Ham because they said that Ham, from Ham come all the black people. And then we get to read and we get to find out that even many of the Yehudi, many of the Jews, even in the Middle Ages, there is the Rabbi Eliezer, right, that clearly says that is from Shem is black, right? That Shem is the black man. Right? This is what's so very interesting about when we hear certain things, rumors and ideas, but I still hear people saying that Hebrew is a lineage. Hebrew is not a lineage when we talk about Hebrew in terms of Avram Ha-Ibri. Avram Ha-Ibri. And if we study the scripture will back this up, but one point at a time. Yeah, so people keep telling this lie over and over and over and over and over again. Okay, so here, let's go right here. We're looking up Eber, right? And they say Genesis chapter 10, right? Because this idea of Shem, Ham, and Yafet as lineage is a modern 400 to 600 year idea in Christianism, right? In Anglo-European, Western whitewash Christianism and amongst Gentile so-called Christianity, and even has crept into modern day Yahadut, or what's called Judaism, this idea. But even many of the scholars of Torah, right, scriptures come from the Judaic perspective, have challenged this idea, like we said about Shem, right, being shahor to say black, right? We'll try to show you that in this video, but this is about that Hebrew does not come from Eber, right? So it says, and to Shem also, something like what they want to make you believe is that Shem, Ham, and Yafet, that these people did not intermix and intermarry, and yet even the Hebrew scripture shows you that throughout, even though the Bible, right, shows you that. So it says to Shem, also the father of the children of Eber, right, the brother of Yafet, the elder, even to him were, it says, children born, right? Then it speaks about Eber, right? And it says, Arphachad begot Salah, and Salah begot Eber, right? So we have Eber here, right? We have Eber here. Then next verse is Eber were born sons, and the name of one was Peleg. Now, one thing we have to recognize about names in Hebrew, names in biblical Hebrew, the names in the biblical Hebrew are based on Hebrew or Afro-Semitic. See, when they call about Hebrew is Afro-Semitic. This implies the Ham, African or Afro, and the Shem, right, connection right there, even in the language. Because you have to remember that all of these sons were from one father. So the question is, what did Noah speak? Some say he spoke Hebrew, right? So all of them basically, it's all derivable from, it should be Hebrew or an Afro-Semitic origin of Hebrew. Next thing they try to do is try to make like Canaan is the one that made language, like nobody else spoke. This is nonsense. This is strictly nonsense. It's the reason why the Europeans try to big up Canaan and the Canaanite and say everything is Canaanite, because in the New Covenant, New Testament scripture, there was a woman of Canaan, and she was she was a Greek Syro-Phoenician woman. It's to stir everything to the Greco-Roman, right? The whitewash Anglo-American, Anglo-European world order. and to take the Bible and the scriptures out of its true context. So what does Eber mean? Eber, right? Eber or Heber. Eber means the region beyond. So the thing we're going to understand about the word Eber is from the Hebrew abar, right? Now, here we have it as the son of Salah, the grandson of Shem, the father of Peleg and Joktan, right? Eponymous, we could say, some say ancestor, some would say, right? So it says the Eber is the name of two patriarchs. So this name is like popular, right? Like certain names are popular, right? Certain names are popular, and here in Genesis chapter 10. So it says two patriarchs and four Israelites are named Eber, because it's just a name, right? Hebrew does not have to do with a lineage like flesh and blood, like so many Hebrew Israelites. Some niggas say you're wrong, but hopefully stay tuned. We'll begin to kind of peel the layers back to get to the biblical Hebrew, what the Hebrew scripture actually says, and not what we have been made to believe by various forms of spiritual COINTELPRO. Like there's a lot of, what does COINTELPRO means? Counterintelligence. I see ones are picking up on that. We said this years ago, the Talmudim no doubt know, right? That people think about it's a certain thing of the United States government. Yes, but it's a strategy. It's satanic. Counterintelligence. So they're going against your intelligence, saying, well, Eber, because he sent from Eber. Which Eber? Eber was a name, right? This is the same as this right here, Eber, right? Notice, this is the same as Eber, because Eber in Hebrew means the region beyond, across, like the opposite side, right? The region beyond. And it comes from this, Abar, as we mentioned, the H5674, that means to pass over, pass by, to cross over. It can mean in the context to alienate, to bring, to carry, to take away, to take, to transgress even, right? Because it's a verb. Right? We basically have a verb right here. Let's scroll down here so you can see that this is a verb. Right? So they're confusing, language. It's like if we were to name our children just from basic English. So you have a child, lovely of God, right? Lovely of God. So we don't say that as three, lovely of God as three separate words, lovely of God, but we say it all as one word, lovely of God, lovely of God. Of God, that's of God. Yeah, that's lovely of God. You know what I mean? That's how they did the names. But here's the primitive root. You can see where this is a verb, right? A verb. So from a verb, right? So from verbs we can get names. This is how the ancient Afro-Semitic, the biblical names. So you see where the primitive root says to cross over? It means to cross over. Abar. Abar literally means he crossed over, because it's the root, the shoresh. Shoresh is like the root. Right? So ones who are caught up in the King James Version and going on basically, do a little wiki. Wiki is pretty good, but unless, information like this gets out there and the AI can pick up on it, you used to be getting the same old regurgitated, right? So transition, it means to transition, right? Right? Transition, to cross over. Can even mean to cover in a copulation sense. So although the meanings we're giving you here, you may think it's a lot of different meanings, but in the Hebrew, one word, right, has those meanings, right? One word Hebraically, we call it the dual sense, have a dual sense, right? So we have right here where we have one sense right here. Let's bring it down here, right? Let's show the dual sense right here, right? Let's go all the way up here, right? Here we go. You see what's to cross over, to pass over? The next sense can be like to transgress, to pass over. So if you're reading the Hebrew scripture, you're going to come across Abar, right, in the Eber, Abar sense, many different places. And the thing that we don't do is say, oh, that must be Eber. That's Eber right there. That's the Hebrew. That's where the Hebrew come from. That's the origin of Hebrew. Because in English, King James Version and English, you're only used to what the KJV Bible and what you hear other people say, and you hear a lot of hearsay, and people think they're big and, their rhetoric, but they haven't really studied this. They haven't really studied. So here, the Abar mean to pass over, or he passed over, he crossed over, he passed over, he marched over, right? Secondarily, to pass beyond, to pass through, to traverse, a passers-by. come from this root, abar, right? To pass through, right? Like the parts of the victim and covenant, when it says like Yahweh, when he made the covenant with Abraham, he passed through the pieces. So he Hebrewed. Like he Hebrewed through the pieces, right? To pass along, to pass over, to sweep by, a passerby. All of this is in the root, to travel, to advance, to immigrate, to leave your country. Some people think that Abraham, called Abram there, was a Hebrew because he immigrated. I remember I used to hear one say that, well, Abraham was a Hebrew because he crossed the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. That's why they said he was a Hebrew. I said, what? So he was a Hebrew because he just crossed a body of water? And that was believable. But until we got into the Hebrew study. See, in the translation, they would have a couple of names translated, and then they give the relative meaning of it. But then when you start to read the scripture, you start to find out that the root words are used, in many different applications. This gives you a fuller sense of what it really means. To vanish, to perish, to cease to exist can be Hebrew too, right? To become invalid, to be alienated. You see all these, even to impregnate or cause to cross. I wonder when people see these meanings of it, you can't decipher it. You can't overs it from the King James English version, because all they're doing is they're giving you, a couple of names like Eber, right? But Hebrew, 2 points I want to make. Hebrew is not a lineage, right? I want to say that right there. Hebrew is not a lineage, right? Not like a flesh and blood lineage. This is what a lot of ones, I know a lot of the Hebrew Israelites, many ones believe that because they still stuck on King James Version. And King James Version is a good first step, but they're still stuck at first base, so to speak, right? To pass over, to cross over, to transition, right? Okay, so remember what it said right here? It said Strong's definition, the same as, right? So here we get Eber as a name of 2 patriarchs and 4 Israelites. Does that mean that they are any more Hebrew than anybody else? No, it's just their name. It's just their name. It's just a name, right? It's a name. See, parts of names, when we look at names as they're transliterated into the King James Version in English, parts of these names appear right under the text as words. The key is to understand that so we can put that into perspective, so we can know the real significance of the name, right? So here it says, and to Eber were born 2 sons. So that's why we have this up here with Shem, the father of all the children of Eber, right? The father of all the children of Eber, right? Because from Eber came his descendants, and the Salah down here begot Eber, and Eber, right? 400 begot Eber, 403 years, and then Eber. Now, these are not all the same Eber. I bet you many people thought this was the same Eber. It's not the same Eber, right? Then there's Shem Eber, right? And you have this one here. Now, here is Heber. See, it looks the same in English with just the H, right? You see the H right there? But actually, this is a different word. See, from an English perspective, a lot of guys will be like, oh, look, there's Heber. And then, the peanut gallery will agree, right? Because the peanut gallery don't know any better. But here's Heber. Here's where we get like Haber. We say Shalom, Haberim. Shalom, Lehitarot. Like Shalom to the fellows, to the comrades. Haberim. Right? So here we have Heber, a member of the community. Heber. But Heber should not be confused with Eber. We have Heber, and Eber, right? Or Eber, and Heber, right? So those are 2 different. But in English, you'll say it's just an H there, and then they'll give you a whole bunch of English comparisons, but it has nothing to do with the root. You see the root here, right? To company, to associate, right? Association, society. Secondary, a magician, a charmer, a spell. Chaber, the chaber, right? Then you have chabar. Here's the root sense, chabar. Like Eber, the root is abar. We have cheber, another different word, right? And the root is chabar, right? To join, to couple, to be coupled with, to be in league with, to be fellowship. This is a sense of the chabarim. Shalom, chabarim, to join, literally or figuratively, right? To have fellowship with, right? To like be in league together, right? So this whole thing about Eber, right? Then over here, shall afflict Eber, right? The region beyond. See, people now taking this right here as a personal name, right? Instead of the fact that Aber is the region beyond. So we have all of these Ebers here, right? Different Ebers, right? And then we have this right here with the meaning of the region beyond, right? The Eber here in the sense of what? The region beyond, right? So here the translator took, right, the Hebrew, right, as a personal name, right, and causing more confusion thereby, right? But now there's the Heberites. See, the Heberites, this is a whole different word. This is the Heber. So to compound the confusion to their confusion, they would then confuse the Aber with the Heber. The Aber to cross over with the Heber from Chabar, to be joined or be in league with, in community, like to say be in fellowship with. Two different words right here. Now, concerning Hebrew, right? A lot of people say Hebrew is a language, right? Well, yes, but as applied to Abraham, right, where we get in Genesis 14:13, and there came one that had escaped and told Abram, Ha-Ibri. So here we have Ibri, right? One from beyond, right? One from beyond. Now there's two truths to this, the dual midrash, as ones know, right? Yahadut in the studies, right? One truth, right? The first is, yes, literally from beyond, to cross over the region beyond. But with Abraham and with the true Hebrews, this has to do with the spirituality. Like if one would say, well, what was the spirituality of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov and the true Israelites? We have to say Ha-Ibri, being Ibri, Hebrew, crosses over because of what was testified as Abraham, right, came out of idolatry, right, came out of false Elohim, Acharim, other Elohim, false gods, worship and all of that. He crossed over, right? So before he came out physically and crossed over, he crossed over in his spirit and in his soul, his psyche, in his mind. You know, like when it says, let this mind be in you. So Hebrew properly applies to the spirituality, right, of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and the true ones of that seed. So this is speaking of the spirituality, right, Hebrew. And the only place we see in the scripture where like others just call the Israelites generally Hebrews is the Philistines, right? The Philistines also, they say there's a place here that they say, because some might run to this, right? Like it says the land of the Hebrews, right? Why did Joseph say that? Joseph said that in 40 and 15, right? Because he was into the spirituality, right, of the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, the Hebrew Trinity, right? As God says, I am the God, the power of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, those three, the Hebrew Trinity, right? So the land of the Hebrews, right? And then they would not eat the Hebrews. Why? How did they distinguish them? They said because they were Shemites. That's because of whitewash, Anglo-European, right, Christianism, right, and religious whitewash supremacy. Not only did they whitewash the pictures, but they also whitewashed and corrupted the meanings of these things, right? It's because of the spirituality. There's a difference. This one is of the Hebrews' children, right? Because their spiritual orientation, because of the patriarchs, set them apart. You know what I mean? Like, say, well, how you know a Rastafari, right? Right? Well, the called, chosen, and faithful, they carry themselves and conduct themselves in a certain way. This is how you know them, right? You know them by their, what is it, their fruit, right? Two men of the Hebrews. Notice how it is applying to them, of the Hebrews, because what distinguished them from the Mitzrayim was their spirituality, right? Was their spirituality, was their, you say, their philosophy based on their spirituality, right? You know, the way they approach life. Now, if you look through the Exodus narrative, right, the God, what says the God of the Hebrews. You see, this also points to the God of the Hebrews, right? Based on Abram ha-Ibri. Why do you think they call Abraham, the father of the faith? Emunah. What was the faith? The faith was being ha-Ibri, an Ibri, one who crossed over, right? Wasn't on like the fleshy side, but on the spiritual side. Not on the side of the other gods, but on the side of the true God. So he crossed over from being on that side of the ledger to this side of the ledger. Now, here, this is just here, we're just showing you in the Exodus how many times the Hebrews, right? So the God of the Hebrews, this also seals the point that Yahweh, who is Yahweh? He's the God of these, right? The Hebrews, the Ibrim, the ones from beyond, right? The ones that are linked to the Trinity of patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and the God of the Trinity, right? The Elohei of Abraham, the Elohei of Yitzhak, the Elohei of Yaakov. Here, where he says, Yahweh Elohei ha-Ibrim, right? So here you ever wonder why the epistle to the Hebrews is called the epistle to the Hebrews and not to the Israelites and not to the Jews or Judahites? Because of those of the spirituality, right? Because not all of Israel is Israel. Now over here, the Philistines are the only one, right, that we have any testimony in the scripture that refer to the Israelites, right? Because we just want to make sure after we get through Exodus 10 and 3, we don't have Hebrews no more until we get to 1 Samuel 4 and 6. And the Palestinians, the Philistines, the Philistines. Here in the Hebrews, the Pelishti, from those from Pelishet, right? Pelishet, Pelishti. This has to do with the sea peoples. We'll get into that a little bit more, right? And the Bronze Age collapse. The sea peoples, right? Pelishet, right? The Egyptians encounter them and they help to relocate them into the Levant, the promised land. This is where we get the Philistines from. And if you want to talk Palestinian, this is the root idea of the real ones. They were the immigrants. You see Peleshet? So the immigrants, right? The Pelishti, right? The Peleshet, or in translation called the Philistines, or later on nowadays called the so-called Palestinians, where it says they heard the noise of the shout. They said, what? Like, what meaneth the noise? What? The noise of this great shout in the camp of the who? The Ibrim, ha-Ibrim, in the camp of the Hebrews. So it's kind of curious that the only place where they identify the Israelites all collectively as Hebrews is when the immigrants, the Palestine, right? The Palestine or the Palestinians, right? The immigrants who were the sea peoples that were harassing Mitzrayim, Egypt, the Tawi, before they relocated them, right? Egypt pulled back her troops, right, that they had in Levant and the Promised Land, and then they placed the Peleshet because they had come into agreement, right, with the Sutanbet, the Paro, the great house of Mitzrayim. That has to do with the sea peoples, right, the sea peoples, right. So here, notice, and when you read the narrative between the Peleshet, the Philistines, let's call them Philistines right now. That's the true Palestinians, the immigrants, right? So isn't it funny? They call themselves Palestinians, but that's Peleshet, the immigrant. That would prove that that's not your land anyway. Check, right? And they understood that the ark of Yahweh was coming to the camp. So this has to do with the spirituality of the people. Note, check. All right. Notice, you don't think that they know that they are the children of Israel? That's not what's important. What's important to the Philistines, is this religious way of thinking. We can't break them. They really have that old-time Negro spiritual. Be strong and quit yourselves like men, O ye Philistines, that y'all be not servants to the Ha-Ibrim. Because they're servants to us, they can't be worshiping Baal and all their Elohim Acharim, right? As they have been to you, right? They quit yourselves like men and fight. They was being edged up, to get their butts kicked, right? But notice, it's only them, right? So even Shaul picks up on that, because there was when they talk about religious war, for lack of a better word. This is what we have here with 1 Samuel 13:3. And the Hebrews went over the Yarden, right? The Hebrews, it's a spiritual warfare, right? Even during the time of the Moshiach, the anointed, the Christ, Hebrew Christ king, right? And that was Shaul because he was anointed. And there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, look what the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears, right? So there was no smith. That means they couldn't make their own weapons, right? So we have like modern even issues about getting weapons and armaments, right? And being able to make your own, swords and shields and military weapons. And both of them discover themselves to the garrison of the Philistine. The Philistine says, behold, the Hebrews. Notice why when you study this, why the Philistines are calling them out like that? Because it was a spiritual warfare, right? Behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they had hid themselves. That's what the Philistines said. Moreover, the Hebrews that were with the Philistines before that time, which went up with them in the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the who? Notice, so the ones who were Hebrews, who are into the true spirituality, right? Even the ones that were with the Philistines before that time, they went up with them into the camp from the country round about. Even they also turned to be with the Israelite, the Yisraelim, right? Because they know that that's where the aggregation of the Hebrew thought, that spirituality was, that were with Shaul and Jonathan, right? Then it goes over here. What do these Hebrews, right? It's like sometimes, when the Europeans had war, they would be calling them by, they Protestants or they Catholics. So in a sense, that's what to say, like these are the Ibrim, these are the Hebrew, right? It has nothing to do, because by saying that, if that only has to do with them, then what about everybody else? Because everybody else, Esau, right, was descended from an Ibri, but it was proof even in the text and his deeds that he was not Ibri. He was none of that spirituality, because otherwise, why would he sell his birthright, right? Is not this David, the servant of Shaul, king of Israel, right, who has been with me these days or these years, and I have found no fault with him? Look at this. Dawid, when his majesty went to exile in England, he said, oh, look, he can't be of David because he's an Israelite Judah, and Judah wouldn't do that. But look at this, David, the princes of the Philistines, they say, what do these Hebrews here? And Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, is not this David, the servant of Shaul, Melech Yisrael? Whoa. So David was behind enemy lines with the Philistines, right? And he said, has been with me these days or these years, right? And I found no fault in him since he fell, right, to this day, since he fell out with Israel. It's almost like with his majesty, Haile Selassie, being in exile, right? He was in exile in Europe. Here we have David in exile with the Philistine. Now notice, after the Hebrews there, in Shemuel and Samuel, notice when the next time we have Hebrews in the Bible, it's in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 6, verse 1. Are we making the point here? If they are Hebrews, why aren't we hearing this all over the place? And we never hear no ridiculosity like Hebrew Israelite. We don't hear no kind of stuff like that. If you're an Israelite and a true Israelite, then you're a Hebrew, right? If you're a Hebrew, right, then you're a Hebrew. But to say Hebrew Israelite is redundant, right? It says like the woman protesteth too much, right, on that level. Acts 6:1. Notice what it says right here. And in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring among the Grecians. Among the who? Among the Hellenistes. The Hellenistes, right? This is used in the New Testament of Yehudi, of Judahites, right? Born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. It's like today. We have a bunch of Hebrew Israelites and others that have been born, like a lot of us in these foreign lands in America, the Caribbean, in the West and everything. And we're speaking English. But then we talking about Greek. Some of them say, oh, that's the Greek. That's a white man language. And you talking white man language, speaking a white man language. How hypocritical is that, right? Are you a Hellenistes, right? You are Hellenistes. So the Grecians right here were not the Greeks, it tells us, but were in the Brit Chadash Yehudi, right? It's like today we have a lot of black Hebrew Israelites. They mention a little Lashon Kadash, right? A couple of twisted up words here or there, right? But they're just like these Grecians, right? Against the Hebrews, right? Hebraios, right? Any one of the Yehudi or Israelite nations, in a narrower sense, those who lived in what they call Palestine, but really in Judea, right? And used the language of the country, which was Yehudit. Notice this applies to all the Yehudi Christians or Messianics, the followers of Yeshua as Moshiach, whether they spoke Aramaic or Greek, right? Hebraian, right? Because once again, it's pointing to the spirituality, right? Because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. This is kind of we have to get into that. Don't you wonder what that's about? Why were the Grecians murmuring against the Hebrew? Well, why was the foreign people, foreign Beta Israel people who didn't really know the Hebrew or the Yehudit, murmur against those who didn't know the Hebrew and the Yehudit and the Aramite, right? Because their widows were neglected in the daily administrations. One might say, take care of your own widows. That's what Paul had said, right? And those who are widows indeed. Are they Hebrews? Paul breaks this down in Second Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians, 11:22. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? Right? So am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? Because these are the different, this one's here, Corinthians. These are the different descriptors. These are the different descriptors used. Are they Hebrews? Are they those of the faith, the spirituality? Yes. Are they Israelites descended from Yisrael, from Yaakov? Yes. Right? Are they the seed of Abraham and therefore of Abraham? That means that they're not just Israelites, that they are members of the nation, like resident aliens, but they do have a seed line that linked to the patriarchs all the way to Abraham. And what does he says? He says, so am I. Right? Just pointing out the qualifications right there. Okay, hold on for a moment. We just clicked off that right there. Okay, let's go right here again. Right, just to show you how it's interesting that besides Exodus and Samuel, we don't find Hebrews being really used elsewhere. Why is that? Right, and then we also can find the spirituality slipping off too. It's kind of interesting when we put the two together. Right here in Philippians, circumcised the 8th day, and of the stock of Yisrael, of the tribe of Benjamin, right, a Hebrew of Hebrews. This is him saying. So is he saying that he's more of a Hebrew because of his bloodline, right? Because of a natural lineage? No, he's saying like somebody said, I'm the best Jew, I'm the best Yehudi according to faith, I'm the best Christian, I'm the best believer of Christ. I know it sounds kind of foolish, but Paul sometimes makes his points, right, so overt, right? As touching the law, right, is the Torah a Pharisee, because he was down with the sect of Pharisees. But then notice the last place that we have right here, right? It's in Hebrews. Grace be to you all. Right, and a note right here, written, this is something that is in some of the manuscripts, written to the Hebrews, right? He was not writing to the Jews or the Benjamites or the Israelites. He's writing to the spiritual core, right, of the people. So Hebrew does not mean a descendant of Eber. Hebrew does not mean, right, a lineage as they have made you to believe. Just like before that, they said, well, Abraham was called a Hebrew because he crossed the river valley and there was some Philistines or Phoenicians or somebody was watching him and they said, hey, there's Abraham Ha'Ivri. Look at him crossing over. We don't call him Abraham the cross. No, it's because of his spirituality, right? It's because of his faith, right? He's the father of the faith. So those who share the faith with him, right, are properly Ibri, right, Ibri. So we're going to make this video right here, just on this part right here, right, about Hebrew, right, that Hebrew does not mean, right, and should not be made to believe. It's really not the language, but it's the best qualifier, right? You could say the language of the spirituality of the faith of Abraham, properly Ibrit. But the Hebrew that we have, more properly should be called the Yehudit, the Yehudi Ish, right, language, the Yehudi Ish, right, tongue, right, of the Ibrit, right, of the spirituality of the faith. There. But no one's going to push back, and I hope to see their pushback, right, because we got some more exhibits, right, to share, right. So Hebrew, the thing that Hebrew has in common with Eber, if you remember this from before, right? See, here's how they confuse people. Eberite. They just guessing. A descendant of Eber. That makes no sense. That makes no sense. In the narrative, it may make sense to somebody who doesn't understand the Hebrew, but understand the Hebrew, we recognize Eber, right? One from beyond, right? In natural sense, one from over there could be said to be Eber, right? But in the spiritual sense, one from over there, right? One who has crossed over, like used to be down with the people who are unbelievers. And then you started to believe the truth, right? You have crossed over, right? And you have crossed over. But we get down to this region across, right? So it's both a name and it means region across beyond, right? You're going beyond, right? Beyond the world, flesh, and satanic seclorum, coming to the true spirituality from abar, right? To pass over, abar. And this right here is the verb, right? Used in so many other places in the scripture, right? That you wouldn't know from the KJV only when you study the Hebrew, right? Or study the biblical Hebrew, the Yehudit. But Hebrew has to do with the spirituality, right? Right? When it says that Abraham is the father of the faith, what is that faith? That faith is Ibri, right? That faith is Ibri. That's what the faith is.